equals November 1939. The air above Karelia was colder than memory itself, the forest silent under an early snow. Eero Niemi, a farmer of modest fields, stood beside his frost-covered plough when the distant thunder of artillery rolled across the horizon. Reports whispered through the village. Soviet forces had crossed the border. The neighbors gathered, faces pale beneath woolen caps. "They wouldn't come here," one muttered, though all eyes turned north, where smoke rose like a bruise on the dawn. Eero's wife, Anya, handed him a rifle older than both of them, its metal biting cold. He felt the weight of every generation who had tilled this land before him. That night, beneath an amber lamplight, he packed bread, cartridges, and a photograph of his family. Tomorrow he would stand among men who had never worn uniforms, who knew the language of forests better than war. The winds carried a promise. Finland would fight. The first encounter came near the Kolar River. Eero's battalion, locals, woodsmen, young boys, lined the edge of a spruce forest. The snow muffled sound, yet the ground trembled with the approach of Soviet armor. "Hold your fire," whispered Sergeant Haavisto. From the trees, breath met the freezing air like ghosts. When the tanks broke through, their metal hides shimmered beneath frost. A single Molotov cocktail arced out from the pines. It struck, and orange flame roared against the gray sky. Eero's heart thudded as he squeezed the trigger for the first time. The recoil shook through him, not just his body, but his very soul. Behind him, someone shouted in triumph and terror all at once. For a fleeting moment, the impossible seemed possible. The mighty Red Army could bleed, and Finnish soil was worth every drop spilled to defend it. Eero learned the forest was their greatest ally. They moved silently through birch and ice, invisible against the pale landscape. Soviet patrols, heavy and slow, became shadows for the hunters. The Finns struck quickly and vanished like ghosts. Each night the aurora flickered above their frozen trenches, a cruel beauty over grim duty. "Keep your fires low," whispered Haavisto. "The night has eyes." Hunger gnawed constantly. Frost-bitten fingers wrapped around old rifles. Eero thought of home, of his son waiting by the hearth, of the world before uniforms and death. Yet when dawn came, and steel once again clashed in the distance, he knew retreat was never an option. They were fighting for breath itself, for the silence of their forests, for Finland's soul. To yield would mean erasing their very existence. By January 1940, the frozen Rate Road became a graveyard of engines. Eero's unit ambushed the Soviet column winding through the deep snow. The temperature dropped below -40. Breath turned instantly to frost. From the tree line, the Finns attacked in coordinated bursts. Bullets cracked the icy silence, and the enemy's confusion became chaos. "Aim for the trucks," cried Haavisto. Flames bloomed along the road, painting the snow in infernal hues. Eero's hands trembled as he reloaded, seeing faces of men no older than himself fall into drifts of crimson. The enemy had numbers. The Finns had the will of their world. When the firing stopped, only the moan of the wind remained. The road, once a lifeline for the invaders, now lay silent beneath frozen bodies and shattered machines. Eero stared across the carnage, unsure if this was victory or curse. Between battles, silence returned like a fragile grace. Eero sat beneath a fallen spruce, fingers stiff as he unfolded a letter from Anya. The ink bled in places, the words trembling with love and fear. She wrote of the farm, the cows surviving the cold, their son asking when father would return. He stared at the letter until the lines blurred, the ache of home pressing harder than any frost. Around him, men mended torn coats, shared crusts of bread, whispered stories of summer. For a moment, the war faded, replaced by memories of harvests and laughter carried on warm wind. Eero folded the letter carefully, tucking it near his heart. When orders came again, move south, reinforce at Suomussalmi, he stood, snow creaking underfoot. Love, he realized, was the reason they endured the cold and the horror. It made the impossible bearable. At Suomussalmi, the Russians came in waves. Thousands of men, dark as ants against the snow, backed by tanks and howitzers. The Finnish defense was thin, stretched to the breaking point. Eero lay in a trench of frozen mud as shells screamed overhead. Earth and fire rained down, shaking the forest apart. Haavisto's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold! Hold the line!" The men answered with rifle cracks and pure defiance. Smoke thickened, and snow turned to gray sludge beneath their boots. When Soviet troops advanced too close, grenades met them mid-charge, rage and ice colliding in raw survival. Hours passed like centuries. When silence finally fell, it was only broken by the crackle of distant fires. Eero's breath came in ragged gasps. He was still alive. Around him, too many were not. The red storm had been halted, but at a terrible cost. February brought no relief. The cold deepened, carving lines into every man's face. Supplies thin, ammunition, food, even hope. Eero watched frost creep along his weapon's barrel, the forest around them reduced to lifeless white. They buried comrades where they fell, marking graves with spruce branches. Sometimes they whispered prayers, other times there were no words at all. "The snow keeps their secrets," Haavisto murmured one night. Eero wondered if their struggle mattered beyond the silent woods. But when scouts returned with word the Soviets were faltering, morale shattered, something within him sparked anew. The frozen silence was not death, it was resilience. Each breath in the freezing dark was a defiance, each heartbeat a promise that Finland still lived beneath the snow. They were called the White Deaths by the enemy, Finnish ski troops who struck from nowhere. Among them fought Eero, now hardened by months of survival. Gliding through the forests on wooden skis, rifle slung across his back, he felt one with the snow itself. They ambushed convoys, cut supply routes, vanished before retaliation. The Soviets' massive numbers meant little against the cold and cunning of these defenders. "The land is ours," one soldier said with a grin. "It fights for us." Eero nodded, eyes hard, his once trembling hands now steady. Every victory was carved from frost and persistence. Yet he never forgot the faces lost in earlier battles, the silent price of courage. Still, with every lightless dawn, he pressed on. Finland's fight was far from over, but in the white expanse he felt they had already proven the strength of their spirit. March 1940. Peace was whispered through the ranks like a fragile rumor. The Treaty of Moscow was signed, ceding Finland's eastern lands. For the survivors, it was both victory and loss. Eero walked the battlefield one last time. The scorched trees, the abandoned helmet half buried in snow. What had they gained? What had they lost? Haavisto clasped his shoulder. "We still stand," he said quietly. That simple truth carried the weight of every grave, every tear. Eero knew Finland had bled, but it had not broken. When he returned home, Anya wept in his arms, her warmth melting the cold etched deep within him. Yet as night fell, he looked east toward the border now drawn in ash and ice, wondering when peace would ever mean peace. Spring came slowly, shy among the ashes of war. The snow receded to reveal fields that would grow again, though marked by the scars of shellfire. Eero returned to his farm, hands calloused not from plowing, but from war. He rebuilt fences, repaired roofs, and in the quiet evenings sat beside his wife, watching the sun linger on the horizon. The land smelled of pine and rebirth. Children ran through the fields where trenches once cut deep. The winter war had lasted barely 105 days, but it had shown the world the ferocity of a small nation's will to endure. As Eero looked out over the misty meadows, he whispered, "We held the line." The wind carried his words across the hills, over the forests that had stood with them, and for the first time in months he smiled. The winter had ended, but its memory would never melt.